All right, so today I'm excited to say we're starting Alteryx. I do have a few disclaimers about this. First of all, I'm going to try to go through it slowly today, but we have got a lot of ground to cover in a short amount of time. If something happens and we're not able to deal with it, I'm going to be recording everything so we can catch up and we'll address it. But I'm probably not going to be stopping for long periods of time to address simple issues, just to make sure that we get through every beginning part of this. Again, where we need to be starting is you need to be signed in through us1.alteryxcloud.com. That is our sign-in link. You probably can figure it out. You're going to enter your email. It'll probably ask you for a validation code, which will send you an email for that code. It's multi-factor authentication at work. And then you have to enter your password. Once you do, you're going to end up at a page that looks like this one. And that's where you need to be from there. If you're not at this page, this is where you need to be at. Also, make sure you have all the files downloaded for the Alteryx introduction files, because we're going to be using those for today's activity. Like I said, if you fall a little bit behind, I will do my best to hold off, but we've got quite a bit to cover in a short amount of time. So that's why I'm just kind of throwing caution out there. Do your best to stay up with it. If you get far behind, you can't catch up, work with somebody nearby who can help you. Okay, so today, when we talk about Alteryx, basically this is going to be a new version of a data analytics platform. I say new, it's relatively new. I used to use IDEA back when I worked at KPMG. All of you know, you've heard that story from me many times. And I discovered Alteryx a few years back, and it was life-changing. It basically does almost everything IDEA does, but more effectively. It's a lot simpler and it's more intuitive to use, which is one reason I like it. One of the challenges is that we've been using a standalone platform, which basically means that you had to download software onto the computer, and then everybody had to register for that software. Well, over the summer, I signed Trim and State up for what we call the Alteryx Analytics Cloud, which is basically a cloud software package, which we're going to talk about cloud software with cloud computing in a few weeks. But this actually allows us to use a browser, so you all can not only use Alteryx on your computer from anywhere, but we don't have to worry about trying to download software and make sure that it's consistent with every machine. So my hope is, this is basically, I think this is the fourth year that I've been trying to use Alteryx for an assignment. The first year, we just couldn't use it at all. It just crashed the Trim and State system. Second year, we got through the first part of one assignment, and then we had to stop. Third year, we got through the first assignment, or we got through the first two assignments, and then we couldn't use it beyond that. I'm very, very hopeful this year that we're going to be able to use it for multiple assignments. And that's one of the big things I'm excited about, because it's a really neat package. So this is kind of the front framework of this. And you should already note that there's going to be a little bit of difference between what I see and what you see. I am the administrator for this particular instance, which means that I get to see everything that's done. I will actually have access to your workflows. That being said, I don't intend on opening every single workflow and analyzing the workflow in detail. I will have specific deliverables that you'll have to provide to me, but you won't be able to get there unless you have done all the tasks that I have you do. So what I want you to do to start out with is I want you to open what the cloud looks like. And if you notice down here, it says available to you, Designer Cloud. I want you to click on Launch. And it should open up a new window. And this is going to put us in New Designer. Now, I will tell you right now, it's going to put some suggestions up, which are somewhat new. You can actually look at recent workflows. I will have access to all of these. You can see that I've got some workflows. Another student's got a workflow here. And then we have Dr. Caden, who actually is also part of our Alteryx Cloud group, has done some workflows. I can access all those. You will be able to access your own workflows. So anything that you create on the cloud, you'll be able to access at a later point. And again, nice thing is wherever we're going. So let's go ahead and let's just create a workflow and see what that looks like. So a workflow is basically where you're doing any type of work, where you're doing any type of analysis. For every assignment, you'll create a unique workflow. And we'll see what that looks like. We just want you to click on this new workflow. So this is just an introduction activity. So what I want you to do is, for every workflow, I think it's a good habit to get into descriptive. Description is really important when using any data analysis tool. If you don't use good description, when you get that big, long workflow and are trying to figure out where there's a problem or doing troubleshooting, if you don't put descriptive information in there, it becomes very difficult to understand what's happening. So description at all times, and you'll see what I mean by that in a little bit. But we're just going to rename this workflow. We're going to say Alteryx intro. I'm going to put my initials, MB, and then I'm going to put 10-4 since we're on October 4th. All right, so we now have a workflow. We know what this workflow is going to be. This is our introduction workflow. One of the great things about Alteryx is a heavily graphical user interface system, a heavy GUI system, which basically means that we're going to be dragging tools onto our desktop to define what it is we want to do. Now, the workflow itself can be a little bit finicky at times. It moves around and changes position at times when you don't least expect it. That being said, this is a simplified version of the actual Alteryx software. And that's kind of nice because the old Alteryx software had some things that were not necessarily intuitive. So let's talk about how we're going to import some data. Now, again, you need to have your data downloaded in order for this to work. But let's just go ahead and we're going to click on this thing that says input data. And I want you to click and hold. And I just want you to drag it onto the workflow. And this is telling Alteryx that we're going to upload information. So we're going to start out with a basic piece of information, and then we're going to talk about some other ways to import data. Now, if it's an Excel or CSV file, it's very easy. We just point Alteryx to where the file is located. So I'm going to say upload file. We can also connect to online data, but we're not going to do that. Let's see. I'm going to go Advanced AIS, my Alteryx introduction files, and I'm going to click my instructor data file. All right, so you actually have the option, if you scroll down, it's hard to see up there, there it is, okay. We can preview the data and see what it looks like, and that should be basically what we're looking for right there. Now here's what we're going to do, is we're going to go ahead and create our data set. Oops, that's weird. Yes.
If you have your data saved to your computer and you move where to save that, then it's building.
Yes, so you want to keep it in the status set.
If I rename a folder later, would that help?
Yes, because basically Alteryx is kind of updating over every single time that you do a task. So if you move things around, it will change that. All right. So one thing I would like for you to do, this is a really important step, by the way, so please make a note of this. Okay, this is going to be true. You'll hear me say it multiple times, but this will be true for every time that we import a file. You will notice that once you've imported the file, you have these options that say import, interpret, call it data types. I would like you to unclick on that. Move the check mark from that checkbox. Why are we doing that? Basically, when you import a file, Alteryx will do its best to try to interpret what file type that or what field types are. So, for example, for instructor ID, if I have interpret colon data types that says, oh, that's a numeric file, I'm going to import this as a number. Well, that's not really a number field. That's actually just it's got a numeric digits in it, but I'm not going to sum those totals together, at least not regularly. So it's a best practice to import everything as a string or a text field. We can convert those very easily, but if we import them incorrectly the first time, it's a lot harder to fix. So that's why I encourage you to import those that way. This is one of the more important things. The good news is if you do this wrong the first time, it's not that hard to fix nowadays in the new version. If you did it back in Alteryx in the old version, if you imported it wrong the first time, you had to start all the way back over from the beginning. So this is one of those things that I'm a little bit hesitant or antsy about. All right, so next what we're going to do is we're going to import some more data. The problem being is that the files we're going to import are not going to be Excel or CSV files. And this is going to be true for your assignment as well. So we need to talk about how do we do that? Can we do that in Alteryx? The answer is yes. Alteryx does have a backend that allows us to do that. So go back to this Alteryx Cloud Portal sheet, all right? And you will notice that on the main page, it says upload data. So let's go ahead and just click on that upload data. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go ahead and take my text files over here. So I'll start with student data. Yeah, student data. And I'm just going to have it import. And we'll try to do the import based on what its parameters are. This is a text delimited file, which means it uses a delimiter, a pipe delimiter, and it recognizes that and allows us to import that. And we can do multiple files at the same time. So let's see. I'm going to go ahead and also pull my transaction data file. So I'm going to be importing these files through this import tool. I'm just going to go continue. And it's going to tell me now I've imported those files. So again, And by the way, you will be able to see everything that you've imported, whether that be through CSV, XLS, or text files, in this data tab under Alteryx Analytics Cloud. So just for context, where we were, we're in the overview pane. That's where we got to the upload data. And then when you want to see what data you've already uploaded, you click on the data tab, and that will show you here. You can also go through the import data tab, or import data here as well. Is everybody pretty clear on importing that data? Good. All right. Now let's go ahead. Let's add those to our workflow. So we're going to use 2 more links. And instead of uploading data, you will notice that your data that you just uploaded should be listed over here on the side. Okay. We've already imported the instructor data. So let's go ahead and import the student data. And again, like before, we're going to click on do not interpret column data types. We're going to do a third import because we got 3 files. And I want to import my transaction data. So we should have three sets now, 3 data sets. One should be our instructor data, one should be our student data, and one should be our transaction data. So are we doing good? Okay. Let's go ahead and check and make sure that our numbers are correct. So you should have 6 rows in your instructor data with 3 columns. And the way you can determine that is down here. It will give you some information about that right here. The detail on that. So 6 rows, 3 columns. Student data should have 37 rows with 3 columns. And then our transaction data should have 37 rows with 3 columns either. Is that correct? No. That's not correct. Nope, sorry. Then my transaction data didn't update correctly. My apologies. That's not the right file. Okay, hold on a second. Not sure why that's not the right file. Okay, let's try this again. I said try. Let's turn that. The triple transaction data here. All right, 222 rows with 4 columns. How's that sound? All right, cool. All right. Okay. So one thing we need to do, or so a few things we need to do when we're doing the preparation here. So this is basically called data cleaning and validation. And you may remember this when we talked about this in AIS. This is basically called the ETL process, extract, transform, and load. I use kind of old school terms, data cleaning and validation. The idea being is that we need to prepare our data for analysis, and we need to validate that the information is correct. So in your files that I told you to download, you should see a Word document called sample data control totals. You will need to open that document and it should look like this. Basically, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be checking our data to make sure our data matches this information, this detail right here. Now, for a file like transaction data, where we already have a basic numeric field, we can use that numeric field to check amounts. However, those type of fields do not exist for every data set, which means that we're going to do a conversion of non-numeric fields to numeric data. And this is only for validation purposes. These are called hash totals, okay? A hash total basically says that we're taking a numeric field or non-numeric field, we convert it to a numeric field, and then we check see the balance is on that. So it'll become a little bit obvious as we move through here. So we're just going to go through one at a time, and I'm going to talk you through what we need to do for the analysis to change. So the first thing I want to do is I want to click on the instructor data file. Now, the instructor data file as it is should be fine. We don't need to make too many conversions to this file, but I do want to actually check this against my records. The problem being is that my instructor ID, because I imported it as a string field or a text field, string is just basically a fancy term for text, imported as a string field, and you can check this to see what type of fields everything is. If you go over this thing called metadata view, the data view shows you what the data looks like. The metadata tells you the information about the data itself. And all of our fields are currently string fields, which are text fields. I want to actually change this to a numeric field just for the purpose of validation. Just for the purpose of validation. So let's go ahead and let's scroll, or actually, let's stay here. Let's, well, I want to do this two different ways. So let's actually do the correct way, and I'm going to show you the shortcut. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be going down here to something called the select tool. Okay. And I want you to drag the select tool over and connect it to the instructor data. And you'll notice once it's connected, it will give the option of making changes here. And there's a lot of different changes we can make. The only real change I want to make here is I want to change my instructor ID to numeric. Or sorry, it's actually to a numeric field. Now there's actually two numeric fields we can use. There's float, which is a decimal field, and integer, which has to be whole numbers. We're going to be using integer for all of our activities in this purpose. The reason I mention this is for your activity that you will be doing on your own. One of your fields you will need to use float. I did specify in the instructions you have to use float for that field. But again, float is when we use decimals, integer is when we're using whole numbers. So we're going to change that to an integer field. As you'll see, this now is a numeric field as opposed to a string field. But one thing that we need to note is that looking at the workflow, it doesn't tell us what we just did. You'll notice there's a symbol without any explanation. This is where I was talking about documenting everything that you're doing so that you know what's happening. So we're going to do something called annotation. I want you to right click on this symbol, and I want you to go add annotation. And I'm just going to type something like convert ID to integer. I'm going to put in parentheses hash total. And while I'm at it, I'm actually just going to copy this because I know I'm going to use this again. So just highlight it and Control C it real quick. All right. So I'm going to do the same thing in my student data now. I'm going to do the same thing in my student data, but I'm going to do a shortcut. There is a way you can go about this, which is something that I just learned on this new platform. You couldn't do this on the old Alteryx platform. So we're going to do a same conversion of the ID here. But instead, we're going to click on these three vertical ellipses, I guess what you call them. And we're going to go up to change data type. And you will notice next to change data type, it's actually got the select symbol next to it. It's saying it's going to run the select task for you, but just for this one item. So I'm going to change this data type to integer. Would you look at that? It does the select tool for you, which is kind of a neat little shortcut, I have to admit. Now again, we need to add our annotation. And if you copy and paste it, like I said, you can just copy that in there so we know what's happened. All right. Final thing we're going to do is we're going to do the transaction data. And we're going to do the same thing. But this time we're legitimately going to actually leave this because we do know our amount field needs to be a numeric field. Now you will notice this amount field is whole numbers, so we can use an integer. By the way, the background for this is basically an activity I made up, like where students were donating for their favorite or their professor that they wanted to see something bad happen to, like getting a pie in the face or something like that. So the professor that actually got the highest total is going to get the pie, and so we can actually see that one professor, 104, is getting the highest contributions, and that instructor would be who's 104? Stacy Keating. All right. So apparently, yeah, there is some need for payback for all of our assignments. Yes. So, all right, going to the transaction data. We're just going to go ahead and we're going to do the same thing before with the amount field. We're going to click on that. And we're going to change the data type, and we're just going to do integer. Now, as I said before, we could change this to float if it was a numeric or a decimal field. You will have to do that for your assignment. But since this is a whole number, I know it's a whole number. I'm just going to leave it as an integer because I just want to have it pretty simple. And again, add annotation. You can go ahead and right click and then paste it. This is not a hash total though. This is an actual total. So make sure you remove that hash total designation. And we're going to convert amount to ID. So convert amount to integer. Now we do need to do one more conversion before we do some more validation, all right? You will notice that we've got a date field here, but it doesn't look to be a date field that currently is being recognized by Alteryx. It would be nice if I could just click over here. I could say, hey, I want to convert this to date. And it actually does give us that option, okay? The problem is that if we do it this way, it will not work. It has to be an acknowledged date format for that to happen. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to use the date time tool. So if you scroll down to the golden fields, you will notice here called date time. We're going to pull that out and we're going to connect that right here. And this is how we change a field into a recognized date time field. So I want to actually select my date field. And let's change the new column, the new column name. Let's just call this transaction date. All right. So what we need to specify is in this field that we're converting, what does the format look like? And it looks like it's basically the first two digits are month, the next two digits are day, and the last four digits are year, which is kind of the US vernacular that nobody else in the world uses because we're weird. All right. But if we scroll through here, it doesn't actually have that format anywhere on our list. The good news is the very first option here is custom. So once you click on custom, and I need you to type in the following for me in the custom format. This is really important, by the way, and I'll explain why. So we're going to go capital MM. Then we're going to go lowercase dd. And then we're going to go lowercase y. And it should show you what your example output would look like, which does look like a numeric field. Now, the question is, why do we have to do capital M's? And the reason why is this is a date time conversion, which means it will look for both date and time fields. Now, are there any time elements that begin with the letter M? Minutes, yes. So if we use lowercase, it would be looking for minutes, okay? So that's why we're using uppercase in this situation. So as you can see, we've got our conversion, our transaction date. We're in pretty good shape. All right. Now we've got everything we need to do our preliminary evaluation, our preliminary validation. So it used to be much easier to do validation in old Alteryx. That's one thing I do not necessarily like about the new version. We do have to do something a little bit tricky, but it's not particularly difficult. It's not particularly challenging. What we're going to be doing is called summarizing information. So I want you to scroll down to the yellow or to orange tools, which should be near the bottom. And we're going to drag this thing that looks like a sum sign. Get it? Summarize. Some of their humor is pretty funny. All right. So we're going to drag that next to our converted ID for the hash total for the instructor data. And it tells us that we need to add an action for at least one of the columns. So here's what we're going to do. Trying to make this so we can actually read what the column names are. Okay, there we go. Instructor ID. All right. So we're just going to click on where it says instructor ID. And then I want you to click on add action. And when it goes on there, you'll notice there's a lot of options. We're going to do this twice, but we're going to do two different actions. We're going to do count. We're also going to click on instructor ID a second time. And then we're going to do sum. Now, what did we actually just accomplish here? Well, if you look down at the bottom, there is now a field output that says I counted 6 distinct fields. And if I sum those instructor ID numbers together, it should equal 621. Why is this relevant? This is one of your validation checks. This should match what's in your Word file. So open your Word file, 621. Now we need to do that for all of these. So first of all, let's go ahead, let's add our annotation, count and sum ID. So I think it said validation, I meant annotation. Yeah, whatever it's called. Yeah. Let's do this again. We're going to do it for the student data now. And remember, we converted the ID field. So we can do that same thing on the ID field. We're just going to click on it, add an action for count. And we're going to click on it again, add an action for sum. So we got 37 distinct records with a sum ID of 703. 37 distinct records with a total of 703. So we should be pretty good there. All right. Wondering if I can move these over, drag these over. There in the middle of the screen. Okay, there we go. All right. Let's go ahead and do one for the last one. Now I'm going to do something a little bit weird here. Okay. I'm going to drag summarize, but I'm going to drag it. Let's just drag it slightly higher than middle. We'll talk about why here in a second. And we're going to just do this on the amount field because that was the one that we converted. The amount field, count, and sum. Technically speaking, you can do your count on pretty much any unique field. Just for context, I'm just doing on the same. The 222 records at a sum of $2,401. So we've done some pretty powerful data cleaning and validation tasks, and our data is close to where we need it to be. However, we do have a few more things that we need to complete. If we look, there is a condition that was set in the transaction data that there appears to be a date restriction, that we only want to look at records that occurred for the month of September. All right. So if that's the case, we need to actually create a new condition for our transaction data to eliminate non-September observations. So let's go ahead and do that. And what we're going to do is, the reason that I left a little space down here is we're going to do a connection to a file that already exists, but it's going to be an additional connection. So I want you to look for a tool called filter. And it should look like a prism that's splitting out data. You're going to drag that, and we're going to drag it over here. It's going to connect to our convert date field. And we're just going to move that over here. I'm going to try to make this smaller. I'm going to put it right underneath this sum field. So basically what we're going to do for the filter field is that we want to filter out anything that does not exist in our parameter situation. So we're going to filter out non-September dates. So let's go ahead and select a date. We're going to select a column. We're going to select transaction date. Now there's a few ways we could go about this. All right. It gives us a few different operators. Obviously, if we know that there's no transactions after September, we could say anything that's greater than or equal to the beginning of September would be fine. But let's assume that we don't know what the range of the data is. In that case, we could select a range for our dates. So we're going to say our start date is going to be September 1st, and our end date will be September 30th. The only reason I say for a range is you will need to use the range function for your homework. There is actually no transactions after September in this particular file, but this is just good practice to get used to something that you will be using in the future. All right. So if that's the case, we should now have a file that's only September dates. That's only September dates. So let's go ahead and let's do another summary, but this time we're going to summarize on this data. Oh, by the way, I should probably mention this. So something you will notice here is that we've got two different conditions. We've got one that's T and one that's F. What do you suppose that stands for? True and false. So this is what meets our condition, our true transactions, which is 159 rows. And then our false is basically the remaining 63 rows. Because remember, there are 222 fields. 222 rows, excuse me. So we're going to summarize those 159 records, because those are the ones that meet our true condition. So let's go ahead and pull out that summary tool again. Connect it to the true arrow. And then we're going to do what we did before. We're going to count in some amount. Right. So we should have a count of 159 records with a sum of 1659, and that's what matches our control totals. So make sure you add your annotation. And our validation is done. Okay, our validation is done. Our cleaning and validation is basically, our cleaning is not complete, but our validation is complete. Which I think most everybody who's in this course either took Professor Amos or took me in the first year I taught AIS. This is something I didn't mention back in those AIS courses. But data cleaning and validation tends to take 50 to 90% of the time when it comes to data analysis. So in reality, this would be the majority of our tasks here. Now, the good news is that I've specifically tailored this assignment for minimum data cleaning and validation and maximum data analysis, which is what we're going to be doing next week. But this is still important to understand what we need to be doing. However, we do have some things that we need to do in preparation for next week. Okay, so actually, to be fair, we're not going to be using this data set for next week. We're going to be using the data set you'll be working on for your assignment. But assuming I was moving forward, there was one more cleaning task that I would need to take care of. So one thing I want you to look at is I want you to look at the transaction data. It doesn't matter, it could be the clean transaction data or the original transaction data, whichever. So if I scroll up here, I notice that I've got a student ID field, which is basically just MAC and then a number followed behind it. And these are the students' names that I made up here. But if I go to the student data field, I've got that same information, but it's split between two fields. In order to be able to match this information for further analysis, I need to have a field that's consistent for those two fields. Now, if we're doing this in Excel, this would be easy. This is just a simple concatenation. If we're doing it in Alteryx, we need to do basically the same thing, but we have to use a specialized tool for it. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to do something really, really weird, because it's just the way that we're going to have to set this up, is that we're going to be pulling up what's called the formula tool, which is one of these blue tools. And I want you to pull this formula tool out, but I don't want you to connect it to anything, because our connection is going to be really, really bizarre. Because if we try to connect it here, we don't want to connect it to the summary file. We actually want to connect it to our original student data file. So what you're going to do is you're going to click on this arrow next to student data, and then you're going to drag it to connect it to that formula tool. Now we can drag and move it around so it doesn't connect to anything. So I want to create a column that's going to be equivalent to student ID. So I'm just going to rename this column, or name this column student ID. And I want to leave it as a string field. And again, like I said, if we were doing this in Excel, we would just concatenate, which is basically what we're going to be doing here. So if we note that we got our two fields, I believe it was a student, or program and ID is what it was in the student data field. So I can actually refer back to that so I can make sure I got that. So yeah, program and ID. I want to concatenate those two fields. So I'm just going to type in the word program or start typing it. And you will notice that when we start typing it in, it will give us functions that we can run, or in brackets, it will give us the field name. So we can click on that field or that field name. And then we're going to do another one. But before that, we're just going to concatenate, which is a plus sign. Well, isn't that easy? We're going to type in ID, and then we need to actually select the ID from here. So we should have in brackets program and ID. And once you've done that, you've got a new field that we should be able to match across to one another. So that's the introduction. And basically everything that was listed in the introduction is what you need to know for the assignment. So real quick, let's just talk quickly about what the assignment is. So you're going to be importing a new series of data sets. Now, I do want to make sure that we're very clear on something. The objective of this particular activity is to make sure that your entire series of data sets are cleaned and validated precisely. If you do not have them cleaned and validated exactly according to these instructions, then the assignment that we're going to do after this is going to be difficult because you're going to be using this data again. Now, the good news is that you've got 2 weeks for this assignment because I didn't make it due during next Friday when you all will be off. So you've actually got 2 weeks. The bad news is that because of the way the schedule breaks out, is that we won't be looking at this data again for 3 weeks. So it may be easy to forget about this. That being said, this is going to be recorded. You'll be able to actually have active information on it. We will walk through the next part of the activity when we start doing this again 3 weeks from now. But basically, you're going to be repeating the tasks that we did before with a little bit less instruction. There are going to be some differences. I may ask you to do some things that we didn't precisely talk about today, but you should have enough information now, if not to do it precisely, to actually figure out what it is you need to do. This will be an ongoing theme with Alteryx, is that I'm going to introduce you to the basic stuff, and then you're going to kind of iterate on that with your activities as we move forward in the course. Yes.
When you did the finding program ID, is there a way to include like a space or a comma if you wanted to?
Yeah. So if I wanted to do something like that, I could just kind of do the same thing that I do in Excel. But you can see now that I've got Mac with a space in it. I did like just a space there. Yeah, same format for that. Good question. All right. I know this is going to be unfamiliar, and I know that there will be questions. If you have questions, feel free to shoot me an email. Let me know if you have problems. Please make sure that you are clear on what your deliverables are. I do have some very specific instructions for deliverables. They're going to be minimal, but they are going to be very, very specific. So make sure that you pay close attention to that. And with that, if you want to start cracking at it, we got 4 minutes left in class. Otherwise, I'm going to call it good and wish you all a happy weekend.